Hello everyone. In today's unboxing, it's going to be, it's going to be a little different than what I normally do. So first, let me explain how I got here. Why these supplies? Because a lot has happened and things are changing. Knowing my new art supplies would be arriving, I spent the weekend packing up all of my acrylic paints and everything that goes with them. And I have a lot of gesso, mediums, and hand mixed paints. I'm doing this because I just can't look at them anymore. I question myself every time I walk into my studio, telling myself I'm crazy or that it's a fluke or that maybe this time I won't have any problems with my lungs because I've developed an allergy to acrylic paint. It started with irritation on my hands when I painted, and I just started to wear gloves thinking, well, I have sensitive skin, so that makes sense. And I just didn't really think anything of it. But then I started to have problems with my lungs where I felt like I was having an asthma problem. And so I cleaned my studio. I searched everywhere. I thought maybe I have dust or mold or something that is causing this problem. Nope. Turns out it's just my paint because during the holiday prep season, I spent well over a solid 48 hours in a row in my studio working on client projects with no problem whatsoever. So it wasn't my space, it was the materials I was using. I did a lot of research into finding art supplies that are non-toxic and that don't produce fumes when using them, because acrylic paints do, even if you can't smell it. And I ended up landing on gouache. It's a material I am not super familiar with. I have some acrylic gouache, and honestly, I'm afraid to try using it now that I know that I have problems with acrylic materials. So what I did was I bought a bunch of these colors, and I hope that I can find a way to use gouache, because if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of like a hybrid between watercolors and acrylics, maybe even like oil paints, because you can use them in a opaque way that you can't use watercolors. So watercolors are transparent and luminescent and, quite nice, but they aren't always the way I want to communicate when I create. So I've picked up a few art supplies from Jackson's and an art supply store in Toronto, because I don't have one anymore in my city, so I had to order in. Now, there are different types of gouache and different brands, and I decided to also grab this like basic student quality from Caran D'Ache. It's pre-dried, they're in pans. It's kind of like watercolor, like buying a watercolor set, only the paint itself is matte and supposed to be a good starter to using gouache. I did this because, frankly, I don't want to waste a lot of the expensive gouache while trying to learn things. And I know logically I should have just bought maybe this kit, but it's also been on my wish list for well over a year to try because I absolutely love Caran D'Ache as a brand. So I decided to splurge to give myself some creative hope by buying materials that are new to me and could maybe perhaps spark some joy in getting into that creative mood again. And I'm really excited to try them. I also grabbed some from Holbein. So the first brand I showed you, I can't remember, did I say what they were? They're Shinhan. Anyways, and Holbein is also a very well-named brand. It's very popular among gouache artists. And I decided to make sure that my palette was just a basic, well-rounded palette. So I have a primary magenta, I have some vermilion, I have an opera pink, I just love that color. So I went with that. But I have 2 blues, I have 2 yellows, I have a white, I even have a burnt sienna. I'm going to show you that in a second. Now, I want to point out though, this vermilion online was more of a redder vermilion. But in person, looking at this label, oh man, did I get nervous. It's very orange. It's not exactly what I thought it would turn out to be, because vermilion can be kind of like a pyrrole red slash, you know, naphthol reddy color. So I may have to mix to get that with this one, but we'll see. But yeah, I did get a burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a really good color for mixing. You can get some very interesting reds, pinks, even some greens, you know, like it's, yeah. Anyways, I also got a black because I frequently use black acrylic paint and yellow when I was doing acrylics to create greens. So we'll see how it works out. Now the items arrived and they're really cold because it's super cold down here. So I'm going to let them cool down and then we'll swatch them later. Now I am thinking that this permanent white might not be big enough. I'll probably run out of this long before I run out of anything else. Oh, also, I forgot. I had another group of items that I had ordered. They just arrived a few days later because the store in Toronto was having a sale and I decided to, like I said, treat myself. I use this sketchbook a lot. The square one, it's my favorite. I use it almost every day and I only have a few pages left of the one that I have, so I had to get another one. I also purchased a new paint tape because the one that I have rips watercolor paper and gouache is best used with watercolor paper. So I'm hoping that this is going to be really good, but we can test it out later on in the swatching. Hopefully it doesn't rip my paper. And then I grabbed some markers. Now, I know Posca markers are technically acrylic paint. They're water-based. I use them all the time, and I don't have a problem with smells. However, these ones are bigger, and I'm a little nervous, but I really want to start working on my value scales when I'm drawing in my sketchbooks, and I thought having these really big ones will just reduce the need to be super particular about details. So I got a light blue, a dark blue, and a white, because you can't go wrong with having white. And we'll see how often I use them. If I have any problems with them, I'm really hoping I don't, because the little ones that I use in my sketchbooks all the time, no problems whatsoever, which I find very weird about my new allergy, but let's just move along. And because I also love Tombow markers and using them in my sketchbooks, I decided to grab some of the Faber-Castell. I can't remember what they're called. They're watercolor markers, basically. And yeah, so let's swatch them and we can just go over what they look like and everything. But first I want to start swatching the Caran D'Ache. I watched several reviews. Many people said they weren't very opaque when used on dark paper or over dark lines. So what I'm going to do is swatch it all out on my swatch sketchbook and then on black and a tanned paper. This here is the lemon yellow in the set. And once I've done swatching this row and you can see them all, I am going to have to move the swatching of the colored sheets off camera because it got very awkward swatching them. I was sitting at the kitchen table versus in my studio. Oops. The second yellow in the palette is just called Yellow, and it's a warm yellow. When I opened the box, some of the colors weren't in an order that I liked. They actually had yellow first and then lemon yellow. And so I rearranged the whole kit to fit my personal standards. And that's what I kind of like about this starter kit, is that you can move the palettes around. So this red here is Carmine Lake, and it's a nice kind of cherry cool red. what I found interesting about these gouache pans when I was watching reviews is that a lot of people were actually just using them as if they were, sorry if you hear any funny sounds, my dog's next to me. Wait, okay. This color is Vermillion, and it's a redder, but still on the warm tone, like on the warm side of the color scale. Sorry, he's making so many weird noises right now. Anyways, where was I? This one here is their Magenta. Now, what I was saying was that I found it very interesting when I was watching a lot of reviews and other artists using them, is that they were treating these pans as if they were watercolor and just putting like a drop of water on them or using a wet brush to pick up color. And I think that might be why some people were finding it difficult to have them very opaque. So my approach was to squirt the whole thing with water with my spray bottle and try to let the water soak in a little to really make it, nice and juicy so that you can pick up a lot of paint. And I find that really works. So this purple here is violet. It's very deep. And then right now we are looking at a cyan. I would call this maybe a mix between like a phthalo and a cyan. And then the blue is ultramarine. It's just a perfect staple color and one of my favorite blues. And I think it is a great rendition of it. So I enjoy using this. Up next is Malachite green. Now I would call this phthalo green. It's very much in that cool department of the green. Some people might even call it Viridian. Up next is the emerald green. And it's a nice green. I mean, it's not a typical green that I use, but I look forward to using it in mixes, I think. And then the last green in the set is yellow green. And I absolutely love this green. And I know most people will be like, that's way too many greens for me for a starter kit. But I think it's perfect because this is for student grade. It's for people that are learning, and mixing colors isn't always easy. So by having convenience colors, I like it. Now that color was ochre, and this one is just brown. And the next one up that I'm going to swatch is black. And when I get to the white, I'm going to swatch it on my colored paper. So that's going to pop up in a second. But I just want to note that at this point in time, while I'm swatching out all these colors, I'm really starting to see how they dry and what they look like once dried. So laying them down on the black paper, you can barely tell where you painted, but as they start to dry, they become more opaque and you can really see how the colors shift. So that's one of the things that I've noticed and learned through watching a lot of videos, is that gouache does have some color shifting. That can be difficult for beginners. So I don't know how I'm gonna learn it, but I'm going to figure it out. I got this, right? I can do this. Alrighty, so this is the white, and yeah, it's white. So let's move on to swatching the markers. And in order to test out the tape, I thought what I'll do is I'll draw with my markers and then draw on the tape as well, and we can just see what it's like. All right, so the one that I am drawing out right now is the Goldfaber Aqua dual marker Hyacinth. Okay, I definitely know I butchered that. It's number 282, and it's a beautiful muted purple, and I absolutely love this marker for the fact that it has the dual end. Next up is the Lavender Dark, and I have been enjoying for the last few days mixing in the Faber-Castell with my Tombos and really using the fine tips that these have. Oh, I'm sorry, puppy. Do you want to sit next to me again? Okay, up you go. Yeah. Okay, so the fine tips, because they're more like a pen, Ooh, just love it in the sketchbook. Now, this orange color that I went with is the Terracotta, and it has this rich color to it that is absolutely beautiful. I'm currently sketching these and swatching them out as if I use them in my sketchbooks. I don't typically water down my Tombows when I use them because that's just not a part of my flow. So that's why I'm not doing it right now. But I will do that when I do a full review on this type of marker. I just wanted to let you guys know that. Now, this bright, vibrant red is called Pale Geranium Lake. Ooh, I definitely butchered that. But it's a beautiful red. And I mean, like, it's a pop of color. So right now, I'm just testing out this Posca pen. So as you may already be aware, Posca pens need to be activated. So you have to push down on them to get the paint down through the tip of the marker. But the thing is, with this marker being so big, I wanted to record how long it takes to actually activate it. And let me tell you, I felt like I was listening to like 3 songs before it actually became usable. And it is just because the tip is so large. It's the 15. So it's the big one. Now, I became impatient and just started pumping it. And that's actually like a no-no I've learned over the years because that adds extra air and it might even make the paint just rush out eventually. But you can burp them to basically stop that from happening. And when I say burp them, I mean you flip it up so the tip is up at the top and you push down on it with your finger and it should release some of the air. I don't really know the mechanics of it. I just know it actually works. What I love about these 15s is that you can get some really interesting line shapes. So my idea of using them for just doing studies, for doing my lights, my shadows and things like that, I think will be really useful so long as they don't trigger any issues with my lungs or with smells. I'm feeling quite good about it. I also wanted to do a comparison of sizing. So I have the blue in the smaller size that's typical. This is the 5. It's very common. You can get them in a lot of color sets. And you can see the sizing was very different and the options of what I can do is very limited. So now I've moved on to swatching out all of my tubed gouache. And the first one that I'm swatching is from Shinhan. It's the primary yellow and it was made with PY74 for the pigment. It's a nice bright yellow. It's not too cool. I would say it's probably in like that medium range. It's not super warm. It's not super cool. So it's not on the greener side or the orangier side. So I think it'll be a great neutral for mixing and creating some interesting colors. And for the next color that I'm going to start to swatch out, it's also from Shinhan, and it's their permanent yellow deep. Now this one here was made with a dual pigment, so it's PY74 and PY3. I would classify this more as an orange because it's on the extreme warm side for yellows, but that is a good thing, I think, in a starter palette for mixing colors, because this means I can create some interesting oranges and even some really nice earthy greens. So yeah, I think it'll be a handy one to have in my toolkit. Now, I'm now swatching the Vermillion from Holbein. It's from their Adori line, and it's so orange. So it was made with PY74, PO73, and PR254. So it has 3 pigments in it to mix this color. It's a beautiful color. It's just not what I thought it would be. But I can say, as the person who's doing the voiceover days later after swatching all these things and playing with the colors for a bit, I like it. It's a nice color to have in my toolkit. I might have to, it just requires some mixing to make it more of a Naphthol red color, but I think that's okay. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next color, which is Shinhan's Opera. Now this one was made with AR52. So it's technically a fugitive color, so it shouldn't be super light fast, but most of my artwork is done in a sketchbook or on a loose sheet of paper that goes into a drawer. If I am doing something for clients, half the time I'm scanning it into the computer and making something with it. So most of my client work isn't a final project that hangs on a wall and is exposed to light. I don't know what I'm going to become in the future as an artist, but for the artist that I am, this is a beautiful color to have in my palette. And I know I can make some amazing colors with it and just use it on its own as well. So I love it. Right now I'm swatching the Holbein, which is their primary magenta. And this one here was made with PR122. As a magenta, there's a lot of different options, and I'm really familiar with magentas in the acrylic world. And this is very different from how they look. I would say it's kind of like a warmy purple color versus like a reddish pink, but I like it. I'm going to see what I can create with it. So the blue that I'm swatching right now is from Shinhan. It's their Ultramarine Light, and it's made with PB29. For Ultramarine, I would say it's quite smooth. Most ultramarines, even with acrylic paint, have a bit of grit to them, some life to them, and this is a little different for me. So I'll just have to see what it's like to use, and because it's one of my favorite go-to blues that I use all the time. So I may have to try another brand's version. Up next in the blue department is Prussian Blue from Shinhan, and it was made with PB27. Prussian Blue is typically a nice grayish deep blue. It has like a gray undertone, so when you mix it, you have these nice shadowy colors. This too is a little different than what I'm used to, but it's still a beautiful blue. So I look forward to just exploring this more and seeing what I can do with it and the colors that I can mix and how it performs. All right, so the next color that I'm going to be doing is Holbein, and it's their Burnt Sienna. It's used with PBR7 and PR101. It looks like a typical burnt sienna to me, to be honest, and it's a nice color. I used it a little the other day to make a couple of mixes, and I made some beautiful colors. So yeah, I'm glad I decided to just treat this palette like I would with my acrylic paints and grabbed several of my staple colors, because I think that'll just help me transition from acrylic artist to gouache. Yeah, so yeah, it's a nice brown. It's typical. It's what you would expect. Up next is Holbein's Primary Black, and it was made with PBK7. It's not as opaque as I thought it'd be, and it could just honestly be me. I'm new to this, right? So I may have just used too much water and not enough paint. Either way, it's a nice black. I really like how it dries very matte, and that's what's, expected of gouache. So yeah. What I'm doing here for the white is drawing out some lines using a pencil, one of my go-to pencils. So it's just a basic HB. And then a nice dark indigo from Luminance and a fluorescent pink from my Prismacolor, because these are typical colors that I'll use. And I just want to see really how opaque this white is, because permanent white Holbein is supposed to be this amazing white. When I started laying it down, it didn't feel super opaque, and it could honestly just be I used too much white, like water, in my mixture to make this white liquid. Yeah, I'll have to experiment a little bit more with it, but I'll show you guys what everything looks like dry in just a moment. That way you can see how it all looks and what it actually became with any color shifts versus wet to dry. Alrighty, so now that everything has had a chance to dry, we can look at it and see how the colors turned out. First off, I just want to say for the Caran D'Ache set, the packaging does have a spot where you can swatch out the colors. But I personally like to swatch them out on, watercolor paper, materials that I'm going to use. So that's why I did it in my swatch book and on these pages. But you do have this if you would like to know that. So the tape peeled really nicely, like it's a nice crisp line. And there was no bleeding. So I look forward to actually using it in my sketchbook, using it with a lot of materials and seeing what actually happens when I peel it off the paper in my sketchbooks. Here are the markers for how they look. They pretty much look identical to what it was like when it first laid down, because what's nice about markers is the fact that they are a little wet when they go down, but they dry nearly identical to what they look like. And as for the Caran D'Ache in this set, here they are on both, is this in camera? Here they are on both of the pages, on all three options. So as you can see on the black, they do actually come out to be a lot more opaque than they originally looked like. The only one that could have been too much water, could just be the way I brushed it, but the magenta itself, it's a little bit more see-through-y, along with the yellows, but that's okay. The white as well isn't as white as I'd like it to be or expect it to be. However, I have seen on several reviews where people have mentioned that the white tube that you get in the pan isn't the greatest white, and that you should buy something separate from, like, say, Holbein or something like that. But I'm going to test it out and see what it's actually like to use, because sometimes you don't want to spend an extra, say, $15 depending on what it is, and you're not sure you want to use it type thing. So I'm going to test it out and let you guys know when I do an official review of these products. But so far from the swatching, I would say this is quite impressive. Like, I really like how it looks. I definitely say if you want to do less watercolor look, you want to spritz the area first to really saturate it in some water and get it nice and juicy. And then you can really get some opaque coverage and, some great gouache-like thing. But if you wanted it to be more like watercolor because you want to layer and build up your layers, I would say probably starting off with just a wet brush and like using it like a watercolor pan is the way to go from my first initial interactions. Also, this magenta, it really doesn't look like your typical magenta. It kind of reminds me of Nova Color's fluorescent magenta, and I absolutely loved that color when I used it. It was one of my favorite colors and I miss it so much. So yeah, this kind of reminds me of it and I think it's beautiful. So I hope it really just shows in the camera, because at the angle I'm looking at it, it doesn't look the same in person on camera. Ooh. Next up, let's take a look at the swatch cards. So here is the yellow from Shinhan, primary yellow. It's very vibrant. I do love this. And then the permanent yellow deep. Oh yeah, I remembered it correctly. And when you hold it next to the vermilion, you can say this is definitely orange, but it's the orangey version of a vermilion, but that's okay. I think it'll still be useful. And then Opera. It's got a bit of a granulation to it. So it could just be because I had too much water. We'll see over time. Magenta from Holbein. Ultramarine. So this one is the Prussian Blue. Give me a second. I want to show you a comparison. Okay, so I went looking for my acrylic paint swatch cards because I still have those. I haven't gotten rid of them. This here is a Prussian Blue. It's from Shinhan, one of my favorite brands. And as you can see, they are vastly different for Prussian Blue. And I don't know if it's maybe I used too much water to dilute it and put it down, or if it's just the pigment itself that was used, how it was ground, the type of something, I don't know. But as you can see, it's vastly different and not really what I'm used to, but I think we'll see what it's like. As for the Nova Color fluorescent color, I just grabbed it as well. Like it's so close to color, like it's so similar to it. This might be a little bit on the cooler side versus these, but it's very close. All right, back to looking at the swatches. So this here is the Burnt Sienna, the black, and the Permanent White. So as you can see, you can still see some of the stuff underneath it. I don't know. We'll see. I just keep saying that. And it's really, truthfully, it's because honestly, this is all new to me and I'm not 100% sure about it, because when it comes to gouache, I am familiar with, acrylic gouache, but I am really scared to try using this just because I can't do acrylic paint anymore. So logically, that means I can't do acrylic gouache, and I don't even know if I can use all my inks anymore. Anyways, these here, I wanted to just show you some mixes that I've done when I was playing around with these gouaches while they were still wet on the palette. So this here was made using the Permanent White, Burnt Sienna, and Primary Black. This pink here was made using Opera, Burnt Sienna, and White. See, this is why I love Burnt Sienna with mixing and creating pinks. It actually makes really nice colors. And then this red was Opera and Burnt Sienna. So what I did was I first mixed this, and then I just tried adding a lot of white to see what it would look like. So I got some really nice colors. And then this one right here is the Permanent Yellow Deep, Burnt Sienna, and a little bit of white. And it creates this nice yellow. It's kind of like a mix between maybe an ochre, like a yellow ochre, or Naples or something like that. I like it. Now with these two, I really wanted to test out what it looks like when mixing on paper versus drying. Does that make sense? No. Let's try that sentence again. So what it looks like when you're mixing it, and then what it looks like when it's dry on paper. That sounds like better English. Mostly because when I was mixing this on my porcelain palette, and it's a white porcelain, obviously, it looks basically white. Like you couldn't really, you could just sort of see that there was a bit of blue to it, but it was white on white. And typically I like mixing on gray glass when I do acrylics because of that whole seeing the colors. But because these are more like watercolor, it's recommended to use porcelain palettes or stay wet palettes, that kind of thing. So I'll see what fits my flow, but yeah, when I laid it down, it was quite white looking, but it dried and color shifted to be this beautiful lavender color. And then the darker version, which I could see when mixing, again, It came out to be this nice, rich, like warmer, bluer, I don't know, kind of a lavendery like color. And they were created using a lot of white, ultramarine, and primary magenta. So as you can see, when using like a primary set, you can create some really interesting colors, and you don't have to buy everything right away. And that's something that I really want to focus on right now, is just using the supplies that I have and getting to know the materials. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any recommendations because you've used gouache before, or you know of other artists that use it and you're like, this is my favorite person to learn from for gouache, or if you have any questions about the materials that I've purchased, let me know in the comment section below. This whole learning gouache thing is going to be a journey, and I hope to take you guys along that journey with me so I can share what I've learned and ways that you can use these materials, because I have found that most artists use gouache in a very similar way. They're very illustrative with it, where I am an abstract-ish artist, so we'll see. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. And if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in using art as a tool towards healing, that's what I do here. I share what it's like to use art and different things. So hit that subscribe button if that's what you're interested in. If you are also interested in learning more about gouache and just being a part of the journey, hit that subscribe button as well. And until next time, everyone, stay magical.